Hey everybody, Kyle Hamrick here for School of Motion, and welcome to Workflow Show, where we talk about tools, tips, and techniques for motion design. I am super excited for today's show. I hope you are too. Personally, I've been using After Effects almost daily for, I think, 16 years. And so I've spent a lot of my life watching a little bar move across the screen to, be able to preview or watch my exports. So believe me, I have always been excited about hardware and software improvements that make that process faster, make you be able to do your work faster, get your stuff to the clients faster. That's a thing that people have always been asking for out of these programs and out of After Effects. The team's been listening, and today we have a couple of them here to talk to us about some of that exact stuff, how After Effects is getting faster. So let's go ahead and bring in our guests here. From the After Effects team, we have Victoria and
Hello.
Sean.
Hello.
And from Puget Systems, who are specialists in hardware for high-end, workstations like the kinds of ones that people like us use, we have Matt from Puget.
Hey.
And because one longtime After Effects nerd wasn't enough, we have one of our creative directors from School of Motion here, Mr. Ryan Summers.
He's muted.
Who is muted, unfortunately.
No, I'm not. Hi, everybody.
There you go. Your very formal bow was good.
Okay.
So we'll go around in just a second here, kind of get just a little bit more out of each of you, kind of who you are and what you'll have to say here today. Just a reminder, obviously we're here live and we're watching the chat. So say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're here from, and most importantly, let us know if you have questions. Like, you have a direct access, link to some of the After Effects team today. So if you have questions that you've been wanting to ask them, this is a great time to do it. We may not get to every single one, but we'll certainly try. We'll see if it's a good question. So first and foremost, let's quickly go around and just kind of, get just a quick blurb from each of you, kind of who you are, what you do, what you're going to have to tell us today. Let's start off with you, Victoria.
So hi, everyone. I'm Victoria. I'm product manager on After Effects, and I've been with Adobe for almost 6 years now. But before that, I was a motion designer myself, mostly in factual and long-form documentary. But I've actually been using After Effects since I was 13. So I go way back, and it's sort of always been a part of my life.
Awesome. Sean, how about you?
Sure. So Sean Jenkins, I'm an engineering manager on the After Effects team. And I've been at Adobe just a few years now, but I came from 20 years basically in the video game industry. So everything from early Windows games, Xbox 360, through to working at Valve on Steam and a number of games that Valve shipped. And so throughout that whole time in the gaming industry, I actually used After Effects for a lot of work in building games. And so the opportunity to come and help build After Effects on the product side has been an awesome opportunity. Today, I've been leading the team that's been working on the performance improvements that we're going to talk about. So I'm excited to demo stuff and talk about it and answer your questions, hopefully to make your lives better and your designs more awesomer for everyone.
Awesome. All right, Matt, how about you?
Yeah. So I'm Matt Bach. I'm with Puget Systems. So Puget Systems, we build high-end workstations. But my role at Puget is to look at like when there's new hardware that comes out from Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, all those guys, and when there's new software updates like this big update to After Effects, and kind of look and see how they perform with each other. Because hardware's changing like every 6 months, software's changing, usually yearly. And so yeah, my job is just to look at them and figure out like, okay, with everything that's changed, what's now the best, either value or best high-end, thing where people, time is money kind of situation. So I do a bunch of testing, bunch of development of like benchmarks, and then we also publish all of our results on the internet for free, not behind any paywall or anything like that. So my role is basically just to help everybody figure out what kind of computer they should use for different workflows.
Which is great because in addition, knowing motion design is enough. Trying to figure out all the specifics of the machine you need to do that is a whole other task, which is why people like you exist, and it's awesome that you do.
Exactly.
Ryan, how about you?
I've been using After Effects for, I think, 20 years, but the exciting thing is I've used it for a lot of stuff, obviously like film and TV, but I used to make explainer videos. I used to do editing of yoga videos, but the one constant's always been After Effects. So I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I actually got to spend about a week working with the Adobe team, the After Effects team. And we were already talking about some of this stuff, and it's just so exciting to finally see all of this come to fruition. And if anybody's been playing with the beta, you know it's kind of game changing. So I'll let everybody else talk about it, but I'm very, very excited about it.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here to help be hyped with me. You know, like Ryan, as I said, I've been using After Effects for a long time, and it's great to see this kind of development happening. And I'm excited to, you know, if you haven't been following the development as close as, you know, nerdy nerds like us, I hope that we can show you something really new and exciting today. So we have a couple things that we're going to be looking at today, but I think maybe the first thing that we should probably make really clear for people, you know what, before that, I'm gonna touch one button and just see, because I kind of hate this 5 layout. I'm going to see if this is any better. Good. Okay, that's better.
That looks weird.
That was magical.
Just in case it exploded, I wanted to give a warning. So I think the thing we should clarify first and foremost is that the features we're going to be showing you today are not currently in the public version of After Effects. These are in the beta. But it's a public beta that you could be using right now. So if you go into your Creative Cloud app that's installed on your desktop, where you do your installs and your updates for those, there's a little beaker on the left side. I could probably show this, unless if one of you happens to have this ready, or I can show it real quick too. I did have it open. There we
Show
go.
it.
Definitely show it, Kyle, because there's a lot of people who, the second they see that, they've been wondering how long it's been there.
Yeah. Let me, okay, I've got a million windows open. Here we go.
Well, while you're bringing that up, something else I'll mention is that the betas also install beside your normal install. So you don't have to like overwrite your normal install of After Effects, because a lot of people I know are worried like, well, I don't want to switch to a beta because, you know, it's a beta. But you don't have to do that for your production work. You can do it and play around and then just go right back.
Crucial.
And the project files are compatible, so you can move one project between the release and the beta and go right back and forth, and it shouldn't be an issue.
Absolutely. So here's my Creative Cloud app. You know, you can look at all the individual like tracks and stuff there if you want. There's a little beaker right here for beta apps, and you'll have you know, all of the. I think this is all the video apps, right? Maybe depending on how you classify them. And then there's Photoshop and Illustrator and Character Animator down here. There's quite a few of these that are in open beta right now. So don't be afraid to come in here and check this out. And like they said, these are they install alongside your existing installs, so these don't mess anything up. You can check out these new features without messing with your workflow. So okay. We've got a couple different features we're going to be talking about here. We're talking about multi-frame rendering. We're back to this. There we go. Multi-frame rendering, which is kind of the big thing here, the big speed boost. And then there's some other things that kind of come along with that. I think I'll pitch it over here to Victoria and or Sean here to kind of talk us through some of that. I think probably the best question to start with here is multi-frame rendering. What is it? What's it going to mean for the average user? And I don't know, maybe people want to know kind of how and why.
I think, Sean, you should take that one.
All right, sounds good. So multi-frame rendering. I mean, forever and a day, After Effects has rendered one frame at a time. And, you know, there was a separation 5 or 6 years ago between the UI and the rendering so that you could do things in the background. So while previews were going on, you could still adjust parameters. And that is still going to continue to work. But the separation only went as far as, well, you can have one core on your CPU, one thread essentially rendering. And that was great when machines had maybe 2 cores. But now with machines with, you know, 128 cores, After Effects needed to be able to take advantage of more of those CPUs. So behind multi-frame rendering is the concept of rendering frames simultaneously or concurrently, which we'll call back to a 2014 version of After Effects at some point here, I'm sure, that talks about multiple frames being rendered simultaneously. And it is different than that. Let's state that up front. And so effectively what's happening now is when you go to preview, or when you go to export your composition, After Effects will look at things like your number of cores on your CPU, the available RAM, the GPU VRAM, the complexity of the composition, and use a number of different elements so that as we start to preview the composition, we can actually detect that After Effects could bring more frames to be rendered concurrently at the same time and not overwhelm your actual computer. And so we will push it, right up to the limit. And then if we start to go over the limit and we're actually detecting that we're now rendering too many things concurrently, we'll actually back off. And we'll make sure that we stay right, in the sweetest spot possible. We call this dynamic composition analysis. But effectively, it means that we can, in every single composition, take the most advantage of your computer hardware. There are lots of nuances to that. There are ways for you to control, I still need like 20% of my computer to do other things like Slack or chat or broadcast or capture or whatever. But effectively, After Effects can now take advantage of all of the CPU resources on your machine. And so, a few years ago, we had the choice, do we sort of keep going down a GPU route and hopefully get enough speed out of that? Or can we go down the CPU route and sort of build as many concurrent frames and use as much of your hardware as possible? And the answer is both. And so you've seen, there was work that's been done into the GPU side of things to make effects more are used more on the GPU, and there are certain parts of the After Effects rendering pipeline that certainly use the GPU. But it turned out that without more frames being rendered concurrently, we actually couldn't get enough data to the GPU. And so that's why this multi-frame rendering work has come along. I've talked a little bit about sort of how it works, but essentially, yeah, we will, when you start playing back that preview, lots of sort of frames will start rendering concurrently. And that's really what you care about, is can we actually render lots of frames at the same time, use all your computer hardware, and hopefully be able to get your previews and your exports done faster. I think that's probably a good point to stop.
Yeah. Well, I will say, as someone who's been tinkering with this beta for the last several months as it's been available here, Ryan, I assume will agree with me. Like, it's noticeably faster, and especially with some of the other stuff that's kind of been coming along for the ride more recently. Really, some really interesting stuff that can speed up your workflow in different ways. And I think maybe this is still a relevant thing to talk about. I don't know, you can decide. But one thing that a lot of people maybe don't consider, they just say, make it faster. But one thing that I always like from the After Effects team is you guys try to help clarify, like, so make it faster maybe has like 5 different meanings when you are constructing software. That can mean different things to different people, different workflows, and there's different aspects of the program that are all being sped up in different ways to work together to make it faster. I don't know if that's a thing that, yeah. I don't know. Do you want to?
I'm happy to talk to that. It's one of the things we look at. There's different kinds of things. When we talk about performance, we mean multiple things. There's pure just how fast we can push the pixels onto the screen. There's how fast the app interacts with what your actions. So you make a creative decision, how fast does the app respond? So there's that interactive performance. And then the third piece is really workflow performance. And that's the things where it might not be about pushing pixels. It's about making you as a user faster, making your workflow faster. And that's where stuff like Rotobrush 2 comes in. If you're rotoscoping by hand, that can take days. And with Rotobrush 2, instead, you can do something with the power of AI in minutes. And so that's something where it can speed you up dramatically, but it isn't actually about processing power at all in that case. So there's a lot of different things we talk about when we talk about making things faster. And we also have an incredibly diverse user base. People use After Effects for so many different things and in so many different ways. And we have to figure out what's going to benefit the largest number of users.
Totally. Cool. Well, I'm already seeing a couple questions come in. I think, Sean, you kind of addressed this already, but it's a good one to maybe just clarify. Will multi-frame rendering max out my CPU at 100% or close to it? And it sounds like if you want it to.
Yeah, if you want it to, we will do our very best. Now, there are, like I said, there are caveats. If you have, 32 cores but only 16 gigabytes of RAM and it's a 4K comp, we might have to back off because we can't get as much of the memory that we need. But if you've got a balanced system and Matt is sort of figuring out through his tests what those systems might look like, then we have plenty of examples of 100% CPU slammed through your whole render. So
yeah,
cool.
I'll actually mention something on that
I
point.
bet, yeah.
So early on in the beta, I think when it first came out, multi-frame rendering, we did some testing, and we did see like 100% CPU usage on 32, 64 core Threadrippers. And it was great. Like, we were all excited and everything. And then we've been doing a bunch of testing now with like the newer versions of multi-frame rendering over the last week or two. And the CPU load is actually a lot lower. On that, maybe those same compositions with the same system, we're seeing more like 60, 70% CPU load. But it's actually faster now. So some of it is a lot of that work that Sean was talking about with the balancing, making sure you're not spinning up too many render threads and things like that. It seems like that's making a bigger impact. So 100% CPU usage, especially in an application like After Effects that's using the GPU and the CPU and it's doing a bunch of stuff with RAM, that's probably not a good sign, even in most cases, probably. You want to see 70, 80, 90%. But if you're at 100%, that really just means you've got a major bottleneck right there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So Sean, you brought this up a little bit, and I was going to opine on this if you didn't. But some people have memories of I think it was 2014 version that had a thing that some people call multi-frame rendering, which functioned differently.
Yeah.
And there's a good question here. How does a thread get information from a frame that depends on another frame? Which is not quite the right way to ask that question, but maybe a good thing for one of you to dive in briefly.
Yeah. I'll answer. I'll take on both. So the 2014 render multiple frames simultaneously effectively spun up multiple instances of After Effects. So you had the complete overhead of the process and all the memory required just to even run After Effects. There was zero control about how many frames, other than, you were still going to do one frame per process there. And every single process then had to have all the effects loaded. They didn't know about each other. They had no way to interact or to share caches of information. And so while you did have multiple frames rendering, you actually couldn't get the same performance as what we've built now. So to sort of segue into what we've built and to answer that question, because there's only one instance of After Effects running and all the threads know about all of the frames essentially, you could have a thread or a frame 1's being rendered and frame 8's being rendered. And when the effect is written to handle this, to support multi-frame rendering, frame 8 can pull information from frame 1. And if frame 4 is also rendering at the same time, it could store some information, and then frame 8 can use the information from frame 4 and frame 1 simultaneously. We could never do that back in 2014. And so, we are now 287 of the 290 effects that ship in After Effects have MFR support. We're on the final 3 today. So, as of next week, every effect that After Effects ships is multi-frame rendering supported and understands how to work with all of these threads and the frames being rendered out of order. And so, to answer the question specifically, the plugin needs to be updated, which means we've done that for all of ours. And Red Giant announced this week that Trapcode and Magic Bullet and Universe fully support it. Boris Effects have their Continuum suite out, and it is fully supported. And Revision Effects, and a lot of the companies are starting to roll out their MFR support, which is awesome. And they have been through the process of saying, okay, can my effect understand that multiple frames are rendering simultaneously? And can we then utilize the information coming from those different frames to help improve performance overall? A little sneak peek, one of the 3 that's left, Victoria mentioned Rotobrush 2, just by moving it to multi-frame rendering, we've already seen potentially 2 times performance increase on what was already very fast. Oh. So, just even the process of making these plugins support multi-frame rendering is actually causing them to speed up as well.
Awesome.
Well, and I feel like we've been talking about how like it's faster, but we haven't given any numbers. So I want to share some numbers because I think it's super
I would
exciting.
love
Yes,
it.
please.
So we tested a bunch of compositions. One of them was, I believe, the one that you made, Kyle, the AE benchmark that Adobe has
Love it.
put up for download, so you can try it out. But also some of our other ones, because that one is actually the best we found for like speeding up performance with multiple multi-frame rendering. I'm mixing it up with the 2014 version now. But we have a bunch of other ones that we use that are not nearly as complex. So like, hey, we're going to throw spaghetti at the wall and kind of see what we get. And what it turns out that we found was an average of about a 2x performance increase is not at all uncommon. So, just imagine, hey, you're hitting play right now and it's giving you 12 FPS. Hey, you update. Now maybe you could get 24. Like, it's that easy, just a software update. And in the best cases, again, with that really complex project, especially on the higher core count CPUs, I think the highest we saw was just under 4.8 times speed up. So almost 5 times faster. Like, that's absolutely nuts to me. Like, you can do that because, I mean, we're used to trying to use hardware to, improve performance. But when, we're used to like a 10% performance bump with every like new generation of hardware that's, out every 9 to 12 months. And then suddenly there's a software update that's like, oh yeah, it's 5 times faster. It's like, oh, well, all that work from hardware for the last like 6 years is eclipsed from one software update. It's amazing how much faster it can be.
Good. And I know that Chris Zwar put out that article, and this was, I think he was intentionally just trying to find the most niche case where he could do this, but he got like 70x improvement on a specific thing.
Yes.
I think you should just give me that file. I want to see what that file is.
Yeah.
I want to test it myself.
Yeah, and Sean, what was the effect? Was it advanced lightning where it was super fast?
Yeah, it was like just the effect itself went 26 times faster.
Yeah. Well, it's not even like edge cases, like edge cases for like crazy stuff. But one of the tests we do is just a motion blur test, or it just puts a bunch of stuff and throws on heavy motion blur. And even that, I think it got up to like 3 times faster. So like, hey, yeah, your motion blur being 3 times faster, like that sounds great. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I know one of the interesting things here is I feel like in terms of interface. A lot of this isn't going to look very different. The render queue looks a little bit different, not in a way that's weird or anything. But you do see, and Sean, you let me know. I'm kind of just talking here, but one thing about the render queue is you can actually see when you're exporting. You can see what's happening and what's going on across your multiple threads there, which is kind of cool.
Do we want to do a demo at all?
Sure.
Okay.
I can bring you up if you're ready here.
Yeah, bring it up.
Awesome.
We flipped over. You tell me, because I can't see me now. So.
Okay. There you go.
All right.
You're
cool. So if we're going to talk about the render queue, the big thing you'll notice is going to be this top section. It's grayed out. We'll add a comp here and get it going. So in the past, actually, if you can go back, not you, but anyone can go back into the history of After Effects, the render queue design was like from version more like the first or the third version that ever came out, and it didn't really get updated very much. If we hit the render button now, I'm just going to pause because this will show a great example. So there's a few things here. One, the bar is no longer just blue when you're in multi-frame rendering. You have 3 colors if you're lucky. So the blue still represents the frames that are finished being rendered and have been exported and written to disk. So that's sort of where we're up to in that process. There's a dark green bar which represent frames that have been rendered but are waiting to be written to the disk. And then there's a bright green bar which represents frames that are actually currently in process of being rendered. And one of the reasons we did separate these is if you have a slow hard drive, you might actually see the bright green bar continuing and the dark green bar growing bigger and bigger. And that's a sign that actually maybe your hard drive is not fast or is running out of space or something. It's a little hint to let people know, hey, the performance here is not your CPU. It might actually be your hard drive. There's also a new little info button here that will pop open, and you can open this at any time. It brings some of the data that was in the render queue over, so you can see how many frames per second we're actually rendering, how long those frame times. In a short comp, those numbers are going to be small, but for you guys you build real projects, that could be, seconds or minutes even. You'll see the number of frames that are concurrently being rendered, and then sort of start, end, and sort of current time. So I'll just sort of continue there, and you can actually see this progressing as we render. The frames per second is sort of adjusting, and you'll see the concurrent frames rendering actually going down and up. And the reason, this is the dynamic composition analysis. So it knows that I'm sharing my screen and I'm on a video, right now, and the frames that were being rendered were the more complex ones. And it turned out that backing off of the concurrency actually meant the frames would render faster overall. And so this is sort of going to follow out. You can sort of still see, your estimated size on disk and your free space. You can have, multiple outputs. That all still works in the same way. So that's what that sort of looks like. While we're here, and this is sort of something that has happened that most people don't sort of know too much about. So I'll just mention it. We actually do have some new presets. And this is a very small thing, but for many, many years in After Effects, we've had lossless and lossless with alpha. And those have been exporting QuickTime animation files, which aren't actually usable on the Mac or the Windows, well, yeah, basically on any machine, in a player. Like it's very difficult these days to play QuickTime with animation. So we've introduced two new output modules, high quality and high quality with alpha. And they are very simple. They are just QuickTime ProRes 422. And then the ones with alpha are ProRes 4444, and they contain the alpha. But if you see those, that's where that's coming from. So those are two of the big things. The other thing, which we were going to touch on, but while I'm here and I'm just talking and never going to stop, I'll show you.
That's why you're here today.
That's right. So I'll do this one. I'll do this really quickly. So there's a new notify column you can turn on. I'm going to have to turn off my do not disturb. So let me just do that if I can remember how to turn off my do not disturb. There we go. We will turn it off. You can see me, try and figure out how to do this. Focus. Anyone know how to turn off do not disturb? No. Anyway, I think that'll turn it off. Either way. So this notify checkbox, and there's also one down in the bottom corner. I'll turn on both. I'll just hit render. It should be fully cached. It should come out fairly quickly here. What we're going to see is actually some notifications appear up here in my sidebar. And so it's actually going to tell me, hey, comp1, which was the thing I was just rendering, actually just finished rendering. And also that all the compositions in my render queue that I just queued up also finished. And now that's not very useful if you're on the machine that you're actually doing this on. But what you couldn't see is both my phone and my Apple Watch on my wrist both alerted me to the fact that my compositions were done. And so as a user of After Effects, I could start a render and go to lunch or go home. And the moment it's done, it's actually going to inform me on my wrist that it's actually complete. And so, we know that there are other ways to certainly get notifications out of After Effects, but built into Creative Cloud Desktop, Creative Cloud Mobile now is the functionality. And this is in After Effects today. I know people do rendering out of Adobe Media Encoder. I will wink, wink, and say maybe that might be coming soon as well. So, don't quote me on it, but it's probably happening.
I'm actually curious about the notifications. Does it also notify you if there's a problem?
It does. So
that's even better to me.
Yeah.
That's the one that people really care about. So you will get notifications on comp completion, comp error, and queue completion as well. And if you click on the notifications, it just takes you to Creative Cloud so you can see your history of them. You'll get that also on your phone. But that's render queue notifications. Looks like a tiny little feature, but honestly, when we first launched this in the beta and I was out for a lunchtime walk and I had tests running and my watch was telling me, hey, the tests just all passed, that was a pretty cool experience for myself. So,
as someone who's done a lot of work and, lined projects up and like gone to a barbecue or something on a Saturday and then was remoting into my machine from my phone to like check and see if things went through, like, this is nice. It doesn't sound like the most mind-blowing feature, but it's really useful when you need that kind of stuff.
As long as you don't make it so that my phone plays the goat sound if there is a failure, just randomly, I love this feature. Just avoid that.
I actually want to be able to do that now.
It was a conversation.
I feel like we could compromise and maybe have a goat emoji.
There you go. Yeah, I'd go for that.
Good. So I'm getting a lot of questions here. Let's maybe dive into a couple here. I feel like we've touched on a lot of this stuff. And obviously we have some more features that we want to get to, but let me just toss out a couple of these here. Well, here's maybe an interesting one. Again, you can interpret this in the way that you think is the best way to answer this question. How will it compare? It moved. Sorry. How will it compare to Media Coder GPU rendering?
Yeah, so we haven't even talked about Media Encoder, so I'll talk on both of those things. So
what a segue.
What you're seeing in the accelerated multi-frame rendering inside After Effects will work inside Media Encoder when rendering After Effects compositions. So you drop it in, you should see the same performance improvements you see inside After Effects from Media Encoder. Now, when you say Media Encoder GPU rendering, what that actually means is Media Encoder is using the GPU to encode the finished frames that have come out of After Effects. I know we make that completely opaque to everybody. And it also doesn't change the value inside After Effects. So if you had your After Effects project set up as Mercury software and you tell Media Encoder to use GPU, that won't tell After Effects to use GPU. That is purely about the encoding step of Media Encoder. So you can still have those separated. We try so very hard to make sure the software rendering and the GPU rendering inside After Effects always matches. If there's a chance that for some reason an effect doesn't do that and you need to use GPU mode, you'll set that inside After Effects. But that GPU inside Media Encoder is purely about the encoding of the frames to the final format.
Cool. And I believe there might be one other spot where you're going to see improvements from this stuff too.
Yeah, maybe 2 or 3. I might give you a little.
I'll let you say it just because I'm not sure what's public knowledge. But
no, everything's public knowledge at this point. I don't think we're hiding. I don't think there's anything left.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything secret about this at this stage.
Yeah. So second place that it's gonna. So you've got After Effects itself. You've got Media Encoder. If you bring in either motion graphic templates that are built in After Effects into Premiere Pro, or if it's an After Effects composition that isn't sort of a motion graphics template, that still can go into Premiere Pro. Both of those paths will support the accelerated multi-frame rendering for that piece of the After Effects composition. So we have just moved that into beta inside Premiere Pro. People can try it out. There are a couple of bugs. We're fixing them today, but in general, it should work. Another place that this all works is from AE Render, the command line tool. And I know also AE Render has been broken on the Mac for a couple of months now. If you download Build 100, you may actually find it's fully functional on the Mac again. So there's a little, we had to rebuild a good portion of it based on changes that Apple had been making in the operating systems. However, that should be out there now today. In Build 100, which we're releasing today, and that should fully work. Inside AE Render, there is a new -MFR flag, and you can turn multi-frame rendering on or off. And you can also pass in information about how much of the CPU you want to use for your compositions. If you don't pass it in, it will use whatever preference After Effects already has set. So if you're happy with your setup, then you just use that. I think that's all the places.
Can I tack on a question to this? So one of the ways people get higher performance like today is they use some plugins like BG Render Max, or I know there's a couple of others.
Yeah.
Is MFR going to basically make that obsolete? Because if it's already using as much of the system resources as possible, is there any point in like spinning up multiple threads or multiple instances of AE Render?
Ryan, you look like you wanted to say something.
I feel like that's been the $1 million question I've been flagging from people who haven't tested the beta. I know there's a lot of questions both about Render Garden and Deadline, being able to optimize this even further across like multiple machines or on a studio floor when there's downtime. How do I tap into the machines that are idle? So I think those are probably like the big questions from people. It's like, great, my machine's using 70-80%, but how do I get all those other ones communicating with each other?
Yeah. So I mean, our take at this point is those tools generally call into AE render. And so if they could say, okay, yeah, I'm still going to spin up 8 instances of AE render and it's all going to take 10% of the CPU. That's probably not the right approach. The right approach at this point is, okay, we've taken care of the how do we get lots of frames being rendered at the same time, and sort of go to the next level, which Brian was just sort of mentioning about multiple machines. Or, you know what, if you do have 2 processor groups, like Matt, on a 128 core AMD, we can actually only right now access only 64 at a time due to sort of the Windows operating system. But if you ran 2 instances of AE render, you could get to both of those processor groups, and you should be able to flat out take out the 128 cores. And so those sorts of situations are places where I think that will still be very valuable. And those services provide things that we don't on top of it. And so, it's not going anywhere as far as I can tell. It just should have different internals now to make it go faster.
I will say the thing that is changing is if you're just rendering on one machine, you're rendering one project on one machine, After Effects by itself should be faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And easier than spinning up some external app and going through command lines. And,
a lot less to manage. I know I've seen 15 out of 16 cores being used pretty much all the time on various projects.
Makes my heart so happy.
Well, we're talking about cores and speed here. Matt, we have a couple questions. I'm kind of trying to synthesize a few of them in my head here because some of them are very specific and probably deeper than we can get into today. But obviously some of this is still work in progress. But a couple people are kind of asking about like what is going to be the right way to be allocating your system resources for something like this, and also people are kind of asking like, what does this mean for the future of the After Effects machine that I might buy next year versus what I have now?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the allocating the system resources first. So far it seems like After Effects is kind of just doing that for you. Like you don't really have to do much in the way of fine tuning things. Like Sean was saying before, like you might want to leave. I think the default is to leave 10% of your CPU free. Yep. If you're also doing like work in Premiere Pro or Photoshop, you might want to turn that a little bit higher. It's just going to depend. When whatever you're actively working on is starting to suffer, turn that up that extra bit up a little more. As far as like the hardware, what's going to change? One thing that was actually really surprising in our testing is what you would buy today that's really good is still going to be really, really good. Because even if you had a 4-core CPU, and 8-core is kind of one of the more norms these days, it's still super good. It still sees a really good performance bump. It's not like it's going to be slower or anything. It's still going to be 2 or more times faster in some cases. But what multi-frame rendering is doing is it's basically going to let even higher end hardware become useful. So before, we would generally around like 8 cores is where you'd see a plateau in performance with the current version of After Effects. Now we're seeing performance gains all the way up to 32 cores in some cases. Once you get beyond like 16, you have to be pretty complex to need that the extra core counts to be able to benefit from it. But still, like if you're doing things that are rendering, at 1 FPS or something like that, going up to 32 cores can be highly beneficial. The really high-end stuff, Sean kind of mentioned this, is the 64 core and higher. Especially on Windows, you get into what's called logical processor groups, where Windows has to separate them out, and that gets weird. So usually there's not much of a benefit to go beyond 32 cores, but still, that means that if you have the budget for it and the return on investment basically on higher end stuff is there now, where before, highest end machine you can get for After Effects was $4,000 or $5,000. Now you could spend $12,000, $15,000 and actually see a benefit. It's diminishing returns, but there can be a benefit there.
Cool. I know there was one that it's a little specific, but I think it's maybe a good one to ask. Are we seeing any differences in terms of things like SSD speeds, which I know we kind of had a plateau where it didn't really matter. But there might be a place where it is starting to matter, and you want to spend the extra on that hard drive or something.
Sure, yeah. So disk speed, so it's actually kind of hard to test because with like disk cache, I think is the biggest thing, because you're writing big frames to the disk. What makes it kind of hard to test is that After Effects does that in the background whenever you're not doing anything. At least I'm pretty sure. You can correct me if I'm wrong here. So it tries to be smart. Yeah, it's being really smart, which is great for like, your everyday work, because you don't want it to be, taking up. You don't want it to be interfering with like the interactivity, when you're doing things. But it does make it a little bit hard to test because it's not always consistent because it's trying to be dynamic. But it should make a bigger difference now. You're probably going to want to have a dedicated cache drive that's probably an NVMe drive. Because, man, those drives are insanely fast these days. They're like 7 or more times faster than an SSD. And like you're saying, before it didn't really make much of a difference because, even SSDs are fast enough. You can write quite a few frames per second to the disk. But now that we're, being able to render 4, 8, 12 frames at the same time, yeah, it's a bit more important. The nice thing is NVMe drives have come down in price so much that, at least for us, they're pretty much just a standard. Like, you're just always going to use it because why not? Like, it's like, $20 more in some cases. Like, yeah, get the drive that's like 10 times faster. Like, why not?
And this big.
Yeah, they're great. The other two places that people might ask about is, one is like system RAM. Hey, we're rendering, so many frames at the same time now. Do you need more system RAM? So far in our testing, the answer is actually kind of no, because you're going to be rendering those frames anyway. So it's really going to end up in the end using about the same system RAM. We saw a little bit more usage, not that much more. The one area that was surprising to us was actually the GPU. So GPU in After Effects, like, it does a lot. Like, there's so many effects that are GPU accelerated, and like they're so much faster because of the GPU. But the CPU has always been such a big bottleneck that it didn't really mean that getting a higher end GPU makes things faster, because it's got to wait on the CPU stuff. Now that we're rendering so many frames at the same time, the GPU can make a bigger difference now. It's still not nearly as important as the CPU, I think, but you can get an extra performance boost sometimes with a higher end GPU. And in a couple of our projects, one thing we did see is that the VRAM usage went up quite a bit. So getting a GPU with more VRAM can make a bigger difference, not even just from the performance of the GPU, I think, but it's allowing After Effects to spin up more of those render threads at the same time because there's more room in the VRAM, and so it'll makes the overall everything faster because, again, you can take more advantage of your CPU because there's more VRAM. So higher end GPUs from that side of things, just because they have more video memory, can make a bit of a bigger difference now it's looking. So that's kind of an interesting thing we didn't really think about, but it makes sense when you really consider it.
I'll just add one thing. We have great partnerships with AMD, Intel, NVIDIA, all the crews. NVIDIA kindly sent over their A6000 that has 48 gig of VRAM, and we put it into a machine that was decent. The difference it makes is so significant. Like, having that amount of VRAMs, basically everything in that entire benchmark project just goes into the GPU and never comes out. And so, where we would have expected a relatively moderate performance improvement on an 8-core machine, it's running as fast as like a 16-core machine with that GPU in there. It's like that's sort of significant for us. So.
Can I ask a couple follow-up questions to that? All this stuff is so interesting to me. So I think we've seen people ask this question. I think sometimes you think that's just because of like bigger resolutions now, but is that also taking into consideration like now being able to work in 32-bit versus just staying in 8 and then bouncing when you get ready to check for render? And a second follow-up to that, which somebody said, is there ever going to be, or any kind of idea of some type of like task monitor or resource monitor specifically for A, where you can diagnose some of those things? Because like Matt was saying, I don't think those are things people would natively or instinctively go to. But if all of a sudden you're used to working on an HD thing, and then all of a sudden you have to do a 22K, very like GPU intensive effects thing, it'd be great to be able to just diagnose that. Like, oh, you know what? Maybe I should go and like rent a A6000 machine for this project.
It's so funny that this question's come up. I mocked up the resource manager for After Effects about 12 months ago.
Awesome.
And we looked at it and we're like, yes, this is probably something we need, but we just couldn't prioritize it.
Right.
For the work that we're doing right now. Turns out, though, that we've pretty much built all of the back-end data we need building MFR. And so now I just need to, find a week or two and try and build this UI.
I mean, I will say, like, the composition profiler really helps us for the first time get in that direction of being able to get the muscle memory of diagnosing down to a effect or a layer level. So that even that is huge and much appreciated.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about the comp profile. I do want to. There's some stories on that. Just to answer the rest of your question, yes. I mean, there is still a limit right now. After Effects still has this sort of 30K by 30,000 by 30,000 pixel comp resolution, and there is only so much that you can put into a frame on the GPU in our current architecture. There are certainly ways for us to break that composition up into what we call tiles, and then be able to potentially render portions of it. That is something that we have been actually talking about over the last couple of months as a future step, so that we can get more of the comp into the GPU and also, still be able to render it. So yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for us at this point is if you're using GPU effects, certainly things like Element 3D or Trapcode or Magic Bullet, things that use the GPU, the more memory you can have there, the less we have to swap it out. And so, Element 3D might use 8 gig for a model, and then we're trying to come in with a glow, and we have to kick the entire model out just to get enough room to glow. That's what we don't want. And so that's sort of the kinds of things that we're dealing with there. So, yeah. We'll stop.
Cool. There's a lot of questions I'd like to get to here, and we'll come back to some of those in a minute. But we've kind of been dancing around both the speculative preview, or cache frames when idle, and the composition profiler. So let's check both of those out, and then we can probably have some questions about those, and then we'll try to deal with as many of these other lingering questions as we can here.
Yeah. Okay. My screen's ready if you want to.
Okay. Great. Yeah. I am bringing you back up here.
All right. Cool.
Boom. There you go. You're up.
All right. So, and credit to Victoria for making this awesome comp. So I'm just going to just play this right now, just so you can sort of see. So I'm getting 4 or 5 frames. We haven't even shown multi-frame rendering in preview off in this whole time. But, that just sort of rendered while we're doing everything, but I hit the space bar to play. And that meant you guys had to watch it just render. So I'm going to clear the cache here, and I'm just going to, we're continuing this conversation, but what would have been really nice is if I had gone to the composition menu preview and turned on this thing called cache frames when idle. And then, we're continuing the conversation here, and what you're going to see is the green cache marks actually start growing on their own. And this is actually After Effects realizing, hey, no one's doing anything right now. Maybe I can get this composition ready for you so that when you do hit play, it's ready to go. Now, you're seeing it here sort of move from the middle out, and that's due to some settings, and I'll show you the settings. But look, we've been talking, and I hit the spacebar, and everything is cached, and I'm already playing in real time. And, okay, this is a contrived example because I'm presenting right now, but you turn to check an email, you turn to write a Slack message, you go and get a cup of coffee, you start thinking about the next part of your design, and the comp's ready for you. I mean, I think Ryan and Kyle, you guys can probably talk about your experience so far with this, but it changes workflows is what I'm sort of discovering.
It really does.
Yeah. Kyle, can I hype it, Kyle?
Please do.
I think the biggest thing, you guys demonstrating the render queue and AME, those are amazing for at the end of your workflow. But this stuff, the stuff where you're talking about the timeline just showing up faster, literally changes the way you design and the way you animate, because you can try more things without having to worry about how many opportunities you have to try it, right? There's even a really cool little hack with this, that if you actually sequence all of your comps, say you have 6 shots that you're working on, you can literally take 6 of them, drop them onto the make new comp button, sequence them so that they don't overlap. And anytime you ever want to just see your entire project RAM previewed, go and get some coffee. But right before you do that, open up that kind of conform. And 3 minutes later, when you come back, your entire project will be RAM previewed, and you can just hit spacebar. But the really cool thing is if you dive into any of those comps, they also are RAM previewed, right? It's your entire project all of a sudden. It really, it sounds like hype, but it really does change the way you think about working. It's not just faster, it gives you more opportunity to think.
Yeah. Agreed. And just to sort of add a little bit of personal verification to what Sean said a second ago, they pushed out a new build on Friday, I think, and I was kind of checking one specific aspect, and typed some things up on the forum, and I said, and the rest of it finished doing speculative preview as I was typing this message. It is pretty fast, and it's nice to just like do a thing and turn back and go, oh, it's all green. Awesome.
Yeah, it's the first time I've had to catch up to After Effects in 20 years. Like legitimately, you're working and you hit preview. Like the cool thing is, with speculative rendering, you can actually dial down like how short you want the lag to be when it takes off. And I dropped it down to 2 seconds, and I had to move it back up because every time I was like just thinking, okay, well maybe it started going, and I was like, wait, why is it going green backwards and forward? Like this is too much. I just like legitimately needed to slow down because I want to hit play every time. But that's a different experience than I've ever had in After Effects. So it's crazy.
I love it. Kyle, if you want to share back, I don't know if you're still sharing my screen.
Yep, you're back up.
That setting there. So if you come into preferences, there's a new cache frames when idle section. And so you can take this down to 2 seconds. You can also take it up to 15. Our theory was after 15 seconds, you're probably not actually wanting this turned on. So, but if you've got feedback on that number, certainly let us know. We're doing a lot of testing ourselves just to get things rendered quickly at 2, so we know it's pretty solid. It turns out that under that, similar to what I think Ryan, you were just talking about, it gets a little crazy and things are doing things before you're ready, and it's not fun to work like that. So anyway, that's where those numbers come from. And then they've got these settings. You can choose to cache around wherever the current time indicator is from and moving forward, or from whatever you determine as the start of the range, which is this second drop down. And so you can actually sort of adjust. I just want my work area to be cached. I want everything plus wherever my CTI is, my current time indicator, or just the entire duration of the comp. And so, the speculative preview concept was something that came out because of the work we did for multi-frame rendering. Multi-frame rendering wasn't just, hey, let's just spin up multiple frames at the same time and see what happens. We have a team of about 10 people, maybe 11, who for a year went through every bit of rendering code in After Effects just to make sure that it was what we call thread safe, so that we could have multiple frames rendering. So we had to disappear into a bunker for like a year, and everyone had to trust that when we came out the other side, it was going to be worth it. Mm-hmm. It's clearly worth it. But there has had to have been a lot of support from sort of our management team to sort of get us this far. Go.
Making things thread safe isn't even the bit that makes it faster. That was more than a year of just making it safe before you could do the multi-frame rendering part.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So that's speculative preview. I mean, it's supposed to be super simple. Again, preview cache frames when idle if you need to turn it off or on. And shout out to Brian Carter, who always wanted to get a shortcut key into After Effects. He works on the After Effects team now, so this one's for you, Brian, right there. So that's that one. And while we're sort of short on time, I'm going to jump over to the composition profiler.
Yeah, awesome. I'll bring you back up here if you're ready for me. Yep.
Yeah, you can jump back. So there is a little snail that appears. Actually, I'm going to turn off, just to not add confusion, I'm going to turn off speculative preview. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a new little snail icon. But, After Effects is slow, sort of. And when you turn it on, it pops open this new column called render time. And that will actually show you how long each layer is taking to render. Now, this is a very simple comp in that it only has one layer that's currently active. But what you can see is, we also can pull out how long all the effects are taking, plus how long those individual effects were taking. If I grab a masking tool and just start drawing masks, there's a thing we all love. The layer wasn't selected. So you'll actually see that we're able to grab how long does it take for the mask. So if you have super complicated Bezier masks, that might be taking time. You could also add a layer style. And so I'll just do a drop shadow, and that will now give you the layer styles, will show you, okay, it's taking 4 milliseconds here to draw that layer style. Turns out we have an effect that does drop shadow. Is it faster? Is it slower? You can actually now tell that as well, which is awesome. We also track the time for expressions, including expressions that run multiple times in the same frame. We will capture all of that data so that if your comp feels slow, you should be able to now figure out, which layer it is. Two very quick stories on this. One, It's awesome that Victoria's on this call with me today. When I interviewed with Adobe, Victoria was my lunch interview, and I pitched the composition profiler as a thing I wanted to build. And
Here
so
we are.
years later, we got it. And then secondly, we did a prototype of this about nearly 2 years ago. And we thought, oh, this might work. This might be a real thing. And it's taken us a couple of years to get it built. But the first time that this lit up inside the builds, I was the happiest person. There were tears everywhere. This, for me, from years and years of working on other people's projects and trying to figure out which layer was making things slow so I could figure out what to animate, this changed my life that day. And I know that so many people have got the same stories, even just in the beta community, of how this is changing their work lives every single day. So there you go. I'll stop talking.
I think Ryan probably has some specific thoughts on that. Actually.
I think it's like the art director's best friend, especially when you're working remote with people and you can't tap someone on the shoulder. Like when you get a file from someone and you have a data, clean it up or fix it or turn it into a template, being able to just like have a color-coded way to just like diagnose it is awesome. I do have one question/request regarding Comp Profiler.
Sure.
I know it's the place that no one ever goes to because most people don't know it's there, but I would love to be able to see a version of that in the flowchart view.
So the prototype we did is in the flowchart view.
That's amazing.
We built the UI in the timeline window initially. It was a little easier for us to solve all of the how we display this data.
Right.
But there is a design for the flowchart view.
That's amazing.
Assuming I can convince Victoria to let me keep working on this, we will build that. So.
That's amazing. Can I ask a spec render question as well? Yeah. It's something that I think a couple of people in beta, but also just people trying it out are wondering if I would love for it to somehow be able to work in reverse as well, right? Like you have a comp open and it just goes. But if there was a way to do it in reverse, where because this turns it into like feeling like a flame territory, like a flame suite. If you could actually like icon in the project view, say apply spec render to these comps, like these pre-comps, so that while you're working in your main comp, X percentage of your computing processor power can just be pre-comping those other ones back there, because then that's like the difference between like being offline and online. And like you could actually do like client review sessions like in a room, and just it would look like magic. You're just like, how are you making that stuff? Is that ever a possibility with the way it's built?
Yeah. So the way that Speculative Preview today works is there are certain places. Basically, we're just looking for an idle state in After Effects, and we just said whatever is the target composition right now, that is what we'll render. We could certainly expand that to whether it's like the project panel, like you were just sort of talking about, or however we want to pick the things. We can certainly target more than just the current comp. Yeah,
I think the proxy workflow that you already have in for kind of like pre-comps, like just even that, just like there's a square and it's filled in or not, like even something similar to that, or by color, any of those would be super powerful.
Yeah, I mean, certainly something I think we can build on. So, yeah,
I think that's a great suggestion.
And that's the brilliance of MFR. It may be multiple frames for one comp, but we could be rendering multiple frames from all the comps at the same time at this point.
That's true.
Right. That's amazing. That's a good reason to get a 64-core, 256 gig machine from Puget Systems.
There you go. So there's a handful of questions here that, again, I'm kind of trying to synthesize like 5 questions into one here. So you mentioned expressions a little bit in terms of the comp profiler and how you can see if that's slowing something down. A couple people were specifically asking, are you going to see, speed benefits from like an expressions heavy project with this new rendering pipeline?
Yeah, we still have now the ability to calculate all those expressions in parallel. And so you will see that pick up. The expression system itself has not yet changed. That is sort of in our backlog of like, okay, how do we get maybe multiple expressions on the same layer in the same frame all happening at the same time? But we haven't actually sort of been able to prioritize getting to that yet. Yeah.
Cool. So here's a good question that I think a lot of old timers will wonder about too. For a lot of us, I don't know. This brings up a couple cans of worms here. I'm going to try to do this, but I think that the appropriate workflow, there's kind of 2 ways to export your work from After Effects. You can push it to Media Encoder and do whatever delivery format you want, or from After Effects, you render a master, a high quality master, and then you use Media Encoder to turn that into your delivery formats. Do you see any of this changing any of that kind of workflow for people that are used to such things?
I don't think at this point it does. I mean, I think those are still targeted. I mean, it's not like we haven't heard the please get H.264 back into the render
Right.
queue.
It's a long
Don't worry,
story.
it's on the list
Yeah.
of things to do. Please keep telling us that. But it is, that would be maybe the one place that when we get that done, it changes the workflow there. So.
I think maybe a direct question on that is would there be any sort of speed difference between the two?
There shouldn't be. It's After Effects rendering either way.
Yeah.
It's the same engine. So
cool.
The speed should be roughly the same. The real difference is what formats you have access to and whether you're able to render in the background.
One question that a couple people have been asking, and I don't know myself. I know that some of the new Apple chips are still not fully supported across all of the Adobe apps. So this could be kind of a question for any of you, because Matt, I assume you guys, do you do Apple testing as well?
We do some, mostly just to answer the question because we get asked
Right.
a lot of questions about.
There's just kind of a couple questions about that support, or if we're going to see speed boosts with this stuff. So I'll just kind of let you talk more intelligently than I on such things.
Yeah. So every demo I've done right now is running on a MacBook Air M1. It's not a native version in terms of the actual, it's not ported to the M1 hardware, but the Rosetta version, the emulated version, is very good on this hardware. Our internal performances show an equivalent Intel Mac Mini versus the M1 Mac Mini. The M1 Mac Mini is twice as fast. So talking about one place where hardware has really improved, I mean, that is significant. Now, there is extra cores in that M1 Mac Mini, and we can take advantage of both high efficiency and high performance cores, but it is significant. The delta between a native version of AE and the Rosetta version is still something we need to determine. You might want to look at Premiere Pro and do a comparison if people are interested in sort of maybe the potential improvements, but we're not there yet. Our focus has been MFR. And once we ship that, then we'll sort of figure out the next steps of M1 native support.
And I will say that native support is in the works. Obviously, we're not allowed to promise ship dates. That's one of the things we can't do, even with a public beta, unfortunately. But that is something that is sort of the next big thing after MFR.
Cool. Well, I think we're getting pretty close to wrapping it up here. Ryan, do you have any other questions that you're seeing in the queue here that you think would be good to hit?
No, I think those were the big ones. The big question about the Mac. I mean, there's always the never-ending question about layer groups in the timeline, the folders. Like that's like the greatest hits of After Effects. So now that
nodes, make it nodes.
Yeah, I mean, those are the two. Like, can it be more like project or program X or layer folders? But besides that, I think you guys covered all the Apple Silicon, the M1 questions. Those are the big ones.
Cool. Well, how about this? I have a little bit of, just kind of wrap up stuff that I'm going to touch. Maybe, how about I do some of that and then we'll kind of get like a final word from everybody to kind of close things off.
Sure.
Sounds good.
Okay, so obviously you're watching us here on School of Motion's YouTube channel. And if you're, wanting to learn more about After Effects or Cinema 4D or motion design or design for motion or anything like that, I do want to point out that registration is currently open for all of our courses. We have a fall session that starts up on October 4th, Monday, October 4th. So that is open right now. If you want to check out any of these, including the free Level Up course hosted by Ryan Summers, for example, or Demo Reel Dash, also by Ryan Summers. All these courses are great. I've taken some of them myself as a student. I've helped TA some of them. They're great. I'm not just saying that because I work for School of Motion. So check these out. Get yourself skilled up, not just for beginners. They're for experienced people that want to pick up new skills, really take yourself to the next level too. In Adobe news, we do have Adobe Max a little over a month away here, October 26th through 28th. Max is, again this year, totally online and totally free. So I can't think of a reason why you wouldn't check this stuff out. There's top designers and artists from all over the world, as well as like celebrities that get involved. You get to see cool new upcoming features. Sneaks is always a lot of fun. You get to see like upcoming stuff. And again, it's free and it's all online. So get V over to the Max site and register.
Yes.
You can see all the cool stuff that's over there. There's probably one or two sessions that you can probably ignore by some idiot, but there's lots of other good stuff there too. Let's see. I think I've got all my kind of little business wrapped up there. So let's kind of go around and just from each of you, like any parting words of wisdom or anything that you want us to, make sure we take away from this.
I'll say one big thing is download the beta. It's there.
Yes.
If you have access to After Effects, you have access to the beta, and we update it every day. Those are actually our developer builds. They are the ones we are using internally as well. And so you get access to everything we're doing as we're doing it. And we really want to hear your feedback. What's working, what's not working. This is how we make stuff better. This is how we make tools designed for you, is for you to tell us what you need. So we read everything that you post on our forums, on User Voice, all of that. Please don't be shy. Let us know what you need and give the beta a try.
I was going to say things very much similar, but I'll add.
Oh, I stole yours.
I'll add. Yesterday we also updated Cinema 4D inside After Effects beta.
Mm-hmm.
It is multi-frame supported and is the R24 version of Cinema 4D. So if you download the beta and you do 3D, we would love extra eyes on that right now, just to make sure that it's really good for everyone. So.
Awesome.
And we didn't mention the other thing that went out in beta this week.
I know. I was going to say
it. Go for it, Ryan.
No, I mean, if you ever find out that like you bring in a video from someone else and you need to cut it up into pieces, and you're used to sending that over to Premiere or using a plugin, like built-in AI-based, I'm assuming like Sensei-based scene edit detection. It's like a one-button click, gives you your cuts or as markers, which I think is actually even more helpful. And it's there. It's ready to be used. I don't hop back and forth between After Effects and Premiere anywhere near as much now.
Love that. Matt, how about you?
I guess I should say that, hey, if you're in the business for a workstation, come check us out at Puget Systems. But I'll also mention that, we're in the middle of a big project looking at, how MFR is changing hardware. I talked a lot about it today, but in the coming, hopefully not much longer than weeks, we'll have all that stuff on our website. We'll have a video accompanying it to kind of just talk through, a lot of this stuff. But also, if you have hardware questions that come up, I saw a few that were just a little bit too specific in the chat, probably. We do our own live stream every Wednesday at 1 p.m. as well. So check us out on Puget Systems on YouTube as well, so you can bring those kind of hardware questions there, and hopefully we can get them answered for you.
Absolutely. And if when Matt was talking about specifics earlier, if you just kind of zoned out, go over to Puget Systems. You can educate yourself. They have so much great information over there. If you want to learn even just a little bit about that kind of stuff and know what some of those terms are that he was saying, if those don't mean anything to you today, then get over there, check that out, check out their live streams. It's super helpful. And if you want to buy a monster system that can just scream through the stuff, they're a great solution too. Awesome. Well, I don't know that I have anything else to say. I will say that just on a personal note, if you haven't downloaded the beta, you should, because again, it's a separate install. It's not going to mess your stuff up. You can be playing with these new features. You can be helping with the development of After Effects. I've known several people on the team for quite a few years now, and I've seen how an offhand comment, at a conference or something can turn into a live feature. And they do listen, they do respond. And as you see today, there are real people who, just want to make the thing that you want it to be. So let them know. And also, if you're downloading the beta, you can get that super cool benchmark project, which I don't know, maybe I should selfishly play that before we do the outro of the show here, just on the way out, because why not? I made it, and it's cool, and it's fun, and full of all kinds of After Effects in-jokes, and it's like a love letter to After Effects. So how about we can all say bye here, and then I'll play that in the outro, and that'll be the end of the show. And so thank you, everyone, so much for hanging out with us in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. This was super cool to do and get to talk about. We could probably do this for another hour and still not run out of questions. But But that was a lot of talking right there. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.